Welcome back to the long-term series, Whole of Community Change, our episode 5 today, featuring Annalise Jennings, Director of Dynamic Exchange, Maryanne Coconut, Elder and Representative of Napranum Aboriginal Shire Council, and Dr. Margaret J. Wheatley, Speaker, Consultant and Writer. Annalise Jennings is the Director of Dynamic Exchange, with over 25 years' experience in senior roles in financial services and other sectors including property and small business. She's an experienced facilitator and has led business transformation in project management in large organizations and has an extensive background in risk management and organizational culture. This experience has been gained through working in India, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Jennings has spoken on transformation and maximizing human potential in a variety of business and community forums. She's passionate about teams and helping them discover healthy working relationships and celebrating success and empowerment. Jennings balances her time between key corporate engagements, her part-time career as an alternative health practitioner, and has always combined her working life with parenting and study. She strongly believes in human potential and is a passionate advocate of ethical, corporate, and individual behavior in the business community. As Councillor of the Napranum Aboriginal community, Maryanne Coconut's responsibility include education and social services. She believes that education is essential to community progress and has led the way completing a Bachelor of Community Management. Recently quoted, Maryanne Coconut believes that we, the people, are the caretakers of this land, given to us by the Creator Spirit, who is the Creator. We acknowledge him with adoration and thanksgiving. We, the elders, are the gatekeepers, and this is an age-old role given to us by our ancestors. Our knowledge and wisdom of our country is still strong, and will remain invisible and well guarded in our spirit till we die. Our spirit will pass this knowledge on to the next elder in line. An honorary guest today, Margaret J. Wheatley, an American writer and management consultant who studies organizational behavior. Her approach includes systems thinking, theories of change, chaos theory, leadership, and the learning organization, particularly its capacity to self-organize. Her work is often compared to that of Donella Meadows and Dee Hock. She describes her work as opposing highly controlled mechanistic systems that only create robotic behaviors. Wheatley grew up in the New York City area and then Boston, and received her M.A. in systems thinking from New York University and her doctorate from Harvard. During the 1960s, Wheatley served in the Peace Corps in Korea for 2 years while teaching high school English. Her practice as an organizational consultant and researcher began in 1973. She has worked on every inhabited continent in virtually every type of organization and considers herself a global citizen. Since then, she has been Associate Professor of Management at the Marriott School of Management, Brigham Young University, and Cambridge College, Massachusetts, and served as a Professor of Management in 2 graduate programs. She has served in a formal advisory capacity for leadership programs in England, Croatia, Denmark, Australia, and the United States, and through her work in Burkina, with leadership initiatives in India, Senegal, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mexico, and Brazil, as well as Europe. She is president of the Burkina Institute, a global charitable leadership foundation, and she has received many awards and honorary doctorates. The American Society for Training and Development has named her one of the 5 living legends. In May of 2003, the ASTD awarded her their highest honor, Distinguished Contribution to Workplace Learning and performance. Annalise Jennings, Maryanne Coconut, and Dr. Margaret J. Wheatley join me in this, the fifth episode in the long-term series, Whole of Community Change at DG Networks, a member of Universal One Broadcasting. Welcome back to the long-term series, Whole of Community Change, the fifth episode in the series, and it is a great pleasure today to be talking to Annalise Jennings, Maryanne Coconut, and Margaret Wheatley. I shall start with yourself. Annalise, welcome back.
Thank you, David.
And to Maryanne, welcome back to you, Maryanne.
Thank you, David.
And Meg, a great pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Quite happy to be here.
Let me start off, if I may, with some introductions for our listeners. Very brief, if you may. Annalise, start with yourself. Brief introduction to Whole of Community Change so that we can have a reference point for our dialogue today, if you may.
My work has evolved over the last 5 years to meet the challenges of Indigenous communities. The resultant Whole of Community Change, which has come about in partnership with Napranum and with Maryanne in particular championing the change, has brought about remarkable transformation in the community. Dynamic Exchange, which is my company itself, is all about people helping each other, community, NGOs, government, corporate, all coming together to leverage their strengths and to create real change.
Annalise, thank you. And let me ask you, Meg, again, a wonderful pleasure. You have so much experience in this area. A brief overview, if you may, of your life and work.
Well, I can't do that, but I will tell you one of my consistent pleasures and curiosities is to understand what makes for healthy community. It's become a more insistent quest as I note how many of the dynamics of this time are tearing us apart, from speed, busyness, distraction, fear of the stranger, and the sorrow in me for what I see as a great centrifuge extractor separating us from one another at very high speeds, is that the only way that humans get through difficult times is through being together and being in community. And most of what I've learned about community has been from Indigenous peoples in many parts of the planet. Knowledge that is still being held for us, but in an increasingly fragile way because of the stresses on their communities and globalization. But I know that the real wisdom about how to be together and how to be partnering with all beings, all our relations, as the Native American Sioux Indians say. I know that that wisdom is still available for us, and it's ever more important to me that we access it from older traditions, especially Indigenous ways.
Meg, thank you very much for that. Let me ask you then, Maryanne Coconut. Maryanne, wonderful introductions there, particularly Meg talking about being together and the wisdom that comes from that. Your brief thoughts as we start the program today, Maryanne, if you may.
I'm Maryanne Coconut, Councillor in the Napranum Aboriginal Shy Council. Like Meg said, we still hang on to our traditional knowledge, which we like to pass on to our younger people and other people around us to learn from us.
Thank you, Maryanne. Let me go straight to the principal part of the program today, if I may, to focus on, and that is the Whole of Community program, made up of 5 components, made by Annalise Jennings since 2009 in Napranum. And one of those components is the Women's Healing Program. Let me ask you, Annalise, to talk to that, give it some context, and what it is you were achieving with the Women of Worth with this healing program.
The Women of Worth program came about through dialogue in the community and always starts with a conversation about remembering, well, who am I and what's my purpose, what's deeply meaningful to me, what are we here to create together. To my mind and heart, this is where the place of motivation and faith starts, and that's where the seed for Women of Worth started. It involved quite a lot of conversation with women around the community to ask them what was important to them and what they would want to see in a healing program. And they spoke about things like breaking the cycle of shame, having pride in themselves and in their community, about women taking leadership roles and being able to take that initiative, to be a voice, to have self-respect, to leave a legacy and to be a catalyst for their children to have a better future. And so Women of Worth evolved from there, and its principles are very much in delving into the nature of change, the path of resistance, the formula for true creativity, how to manage yourself with grace, how to lead, how to balance love and law, and really understanding that rhythm of time, to talk about the voice of God and who we are in all of that, and to really be able to access that transformative power that lives within all of us, to be able to stand strong and know who we are and what we stand for.
Thanks, Annalise. I must turn to you straight away on that, Meg. What are your initial thoughts about what is being achieved in that program? Perhaps a comparative note, perhaps with what you've been doing yourself. But what are your thoughts as you hear Annalise there?
Well, I was immediately reminded of a quote from the former UN General Secretary Kofi Annan, who many years ago said, "The future of the world depends on women." And I think this has been borne out by the one piece of good news that I can find in the 21st century is the women in local communities with a degree of frustration no longer can wait to solve the problems that are impacting their children, their health, and their community. Women stepping forward in the poorest, economically poorest situations. And we have a lot of information now about what happens when women do lead the way in their local communities. Many of them have been given support through microfinancing efforts. Many of them have gone on to create other forms of creativity and income for other women in the villages. It takes a lot to develop the self-confidence and the ability to assert yourself if you come from a culture in which you've been told you are worthless, you are worth less than an animal in some cultures. So I think this kind of formation work of women really understanding their value, and even more important, bonding together to support one another, that's been the most important component in any of the communities I've visited or witnessed, which is the women don't do this alone. They bond together and they support one another to be braver and braver and to discover their own creativity. And they do that on behalf of creating something for the community. So I still maintain that's the only really positive trend I've seen in the 21st century is women in local villages stepping forward to do the work. And it's very hard work, as I'm sure Maryanne would now tell us.
Thank you, Meg. And I've got a direct question for you in a second, but let me ask Maryanne, when Meg talks to asserting yourselves, bonding together, bravery, courage, what are your thoughts to that, Maryanne, in your community, in your village, and your background as you've grown up?
My thoughts are, growing up, it was the men's world where the woman said, you can't speak. It's the men that have to do all the talking. But slowly I see the change, that women feel that they are equal with the men, that they are able to go about in the community and speak up and have people hear their voices. Like even now, in this time and age, I see a lot of our young women, they put their kids to school and they work for the mining company. And now with the opening of the new shop in Napranum community. There's about 9 young women working in the shop, and they walk there proudly to know that they are working for their families and their children.
Annalise, before I just ask you to come back in here, Meg, can I ask you, I've lived in the southwestern part of the United States for a long time. I've been the guest of Hopi Nations and Anasazi and all sorts of different tribes. Do you think that there's a premise here to suggest that there is more significant change, more strength in this domain of women now becoming the leaders than in the mega cities, in the developed cities? Do you think it's all going to happen in these indigenous communities?
Well, I don't necessarily see this as the potential for great change. What I do see happening is that the women are just feel we can't wait any longer. Our children are dying. Our husbands may be dying from pollutants or from alcoholism or drugs. We can't wait for somebody else to do it. And this is one of the sensitivities we have as women. We look at what's happening to the children, therefore, we work for a different future. We don't work for this moment only. We work to create something that will benefit our children in the future. And we do naturally worry and care about one another in a way that is decidedly different than most men. And so, what I see in the villages is my experience is more direct experience is in Africa and Australia and New Zealand. So it's interesting that you have the experience of my homeland and I don't so much. But what I see in these local situations is that the women just get on with the work of creating change and working very hard to make a future for their children and to develop a healthier local economy. And everyone benefits. It's one of the only places where we could use that slogan that's used against us in economics, which is a rising tide lifts all boats. When the tide is women, local women, then everyone benefits. And we know we have enough data now that shows that women give back 70% of what they earn to their village or their community, whereas men only give back 30%. So I don't know where this is going beyond individual communities and villages, but that's enough for me that we find, magnificent achievements and improvements in communities where the women have been activated.
Annalise, before I move on to paternalism, briefly underscoring the conditions there, your response to both Meg and Maryanne to what they've just been talking to.
I'm reminded of my own experiences as a woman and a mother, and a mother of 2 young men. And in my own life and time where I've had to have found in me that power to face whatever fear is in front of me and to be able to face that with courage and confidence and with determination and purpose. To look at whatever's in front of me in a way where nothing is too fearsome to handle. And so if I can equip myself with that and know my own truth, then I can ground myself in whatever's in front of me. If I can't be that and do that for myself, then I feel I can't stand in integrity with the women that I'm connecting with. And so the work that I do is really a reflection of who I am and what I stand for. So that's what is front of mind for me right now.
I'll come back to you on some of the points. Thank you so much. Let me just review paternalism very briefly and start with yourself, Annalise. Paternalism, big issue in Queensland, big issue everywhere. Just some notes on that, if you may. The disturbance of that, the challenges it creates, particularly for women now, as we're focusing on women in society today. What have you come across with paternalism in your work there?
looking at the broader brush of this, I've run a number of value surveys across several communities now, and in looking at the current culture of each of those communities, paternalism shows itself in the top 10 values of the current culture. For Napranum, that was certainly the case 3 years ago, and through a number of initiatives that the people have put in place through whole of community change, that paternalism has dropped right away. And so the focus of this work is very much around shifting from control, intervention and paternalism to true community ownership and self-determination. And for the women, it's for them to look at what role do they play in shifting this paternalism. And in my experience and the conversations that I have with women on a daily basis, they're strong in their conviction. Their hearts and minds are aligned, and they have faith and absolute courage, and they take that one step in front of the other. But it's a very, very broad challenge right across the board. But people are very clear about what they don't want. They're very clear that they don't want fly in and fly out people. They're very clear about the overall premise of creating this sense of belonging, this sense of connectedness, this sense of caring for the whole. And in particular, to be able to shift from problems to possibilities. And in the past, well, and also now, of course, we see services and infrastructure very much directed towards deficiencies and needs of community, and paternalism plays a very prominent role there.
Meg, your response to that? We're all on the same page, are we not? We're talking about community ownership here. This is where we keep returning back to, in the role. Is it that this is a role defined very much for women, particularly in a community like this, to eradicate paternalism and change it for these other values, for this community ownership?
I don't want to burden women with an impossible task, which is to take on paternalism. What I see happening is they just work around it. They don't have to take it on directly. What they do have to take on directly, though, is how to engage others in the community so they're not doing all the work. And this includes engaging men as well as women. And I think the key problem there is often the dependency, the resignation, the anger, and the cynicism created in the community by decades of paternalism. And that kind of dependency is where we are disempowered by decades of being told that we're dependent and that we're worthless. And I'd be interested in Maryanne's views here, because certainly what I see in Indigenous communities is it takes a lot of hard work to invite in more and more people to do the work. I see it usually falls on just a few women. And how you build a greater, a more robust group of women who are sharing the work. And then even if you get more women to help you, you have to overcome this terrible burden of having been dependent for so many generations. I found this to be a very difficult problem. It took a lot of work. I don't think we ever, as a group of women in any community, changed paternalism. But what I've seen women do is both ignore it and then try and invite more of their community into work that gives them a sense of self-worth and produces something of value both to themselves but also to the community. So I think we wrestle with paternalism all the time, the very negative legacy of people feeling worthless and being told they were worthless, waiting for the government to come in and help them, and then the work falling to just a few women.
I'm going to give that straight over to Maryanne to respond. Maryanne, to Meg on the engagement, the lack of self-worth that is talked about here, perhaps in historical terms as well, going back. But your thoughts, Maryanne?
I see the women are standing up and being open. And when we went for a camp with the women of worth, it was the feeling of bonding, connectedness, and we know that's the strength that the women give each other. Now that we're talking about the women, they do have partners, the men folk, and they do their own thing, but now the focus is on women, of how they're moving forward. So they balance their life with being a mother, send the children to school, and then go to work, provide money for their children and home, supporting their husbands and partners. And some women are single moms, but they make an effort to move forward and work for their children and for themselves to make their life better in the community.
Leads me straight into the next point then, because we're talking about perseverance. I had this in my notes for you, Meg. Perseverance is a big word, isn't it? Love you to talk about this. There's a lot to perseverance. I see it every day in the challenges of bringing people together. And you have, of course, your book, Perseverance. It's a huge part of what we have to achieve today. Your thoughts to perseverance in this regard, and where Maryanne is going with that?
Well, I think one of the things I'm learning here from Annalise's program and what purpose it served in Maryanne's description is that it creates a collective. It creates a group of women who know that they're all struggling with and trying to achieve similar goals, and they're not doing it in isolation. And that gives them the ability to persevere. Perseverance is a lifelong commitment to stay and get through the challenges, and to notice when you have to push forward, but also when you have to rest, when you just have to retreat for a while and say, I've got to recharge my batteries. It's not this hard-headed push, push, push to get everything done. It's not serving everybody and every need. It's really knowing how to keep going. And the one thing I remind people of everywhere is we all come from people who have persevered. So it's just our turn. And we need to realize there's nothing terribly special about us if we're trying to persevere. We all have ancestors. We stand on strong shoulders, but we need to stand together and we need to not feel alone in the work. And then perseverance is a path, it's a process.
Annalise, your thoughts to that in terms of motivation, faith, and the work in the evolution of Napranum today?
Well, I agree that we can't burden women with the notion of paternalism. And so my thoughts around that is that we focus on the gifts, focus on remembering who we are and what we stand for and what our purpose is, and we put all of our effort and all of our energy into that. And so this process is about creating social capital. It's about creating a social fabric where we're all interconnected and we stand together. And it's not just about the women, it's also about the whole of community, and looking at a diagonal slice of the community. It's looking at how the men interact with that, how the children start to have conversations about who they are and what's purposeful for them from a very young age. Parents get involved, community councillors get involved, and elders get involved as cultural leaders of the community. So this is a process where we are all having the same conversation at the same time. And I believe that that's what has given whole of community change its strength, that it created a ripple effect through the community at the same time. And so that listening was really there, and sometimes things just happen at the right time and in the right place. And when that listening and that openness and heart exists. And so this is about creating pathways, and if that pathway has a heart, what I say to people, then it's good, take that path. And if it doesn't have a heart, then it's not for us. And we need to let it go. And so we don't need to focus on paternalism. We don't need to focus on the issues and the challenges and the deficiencies of communities. My thoughts, and in co-creating this with Napranum and with Maryanne really championing this, is that we focus on the gifts of who we are and we put a magnifying glass on that. And that's exciting. That creates energy and people want to be part of this. And that's what I have found to be the experience of Napranum. So when we create that spiritual well-being, when we create that aliveness and we create that curiosity and community, simultaneously we're also creating an economic platform for success. We're creating financial stability. So as infrastructure and the economy in our communities grow, there is the aliveness, the curiosity, the will, the desire, the energy in the community to jump in and give things a go. So we're not giving jobs away to outsiders, but we're actually co-creating from the inside. So this is about growing community from the inside.
And Maryanne, you love to talk about the ripple effect, and Annalise earlier in the program had used this phrase "rhythm of time." How wonderful that is. But she's talking about well-being spiritually, the human spirit. Any thoughts there, Maryanne, as you listen to Meg and Annalise?
We've always believed in spirituality. Before missionaries came and taught our people about Christianity, they believed in a spirit God, spirit that looked after the people and took care of them. And it makes you think that our people, they knew which fruit was poison and they didn't touch it because they believed in the spirit world, that the creator spirit was always there to guide them each day. And we often say that what comes from the inside shows on the outside. And in your community as a leader, you shine like a star. People will notice the change and they want to be like you, want to do the things that you are doing in the community.
Yeah, Meg, I've got to ask for your response to that. I in my notes, Meg, I talk about So Far From Home, and you talk to the warriors for the human spirit and seeing with new eyes. This is all of this, isn't it, combined? This is what's being talked to here. We've talked to warriors so much in past programs, Meg, but this is a great word to use here for what's occurring, is it not?
Well, it is for me, and I find it's very evocative for others, but I take it from a Tibetan sense of the peaceful warrior, or as Annalise just mentioned, the warrior with heart, the path with heart. But warriors are those who do know how to persevere, are those who are sacrificial, who sacrifice, who are dedicated, who are disciplined and committed, and they're never the majority group. They're always an elite group. And what I see is the need for this time in wherever we are, whatever our role in life, is we need to notice that the human spirit is being consistently and terribly lost to view. I look around at policies, procedures, government behavior, how we're treating the earth, our whole desecration of the planet, and also our desecration of the human spirit. And I want to rouse as many warriors as possible to stand up and do work in such a way that it does give rise to the flowering of the human spirit, just as Annalise and Maryanne have described in their work together. I do want to say one thing about perseverance, though, because for me, I got stimulated to write a whole book on perseverance by watching how hard the work is. And we keep ignoring, I keep saying this and we keep glossing over it. But in my experience in community, being able to persevere through the hard times, through the outrages, through the terrible things that happen, both within the community and out from outside the community, to the natural heartbreaks and sadnesses of life, but also when government does intervene and passes a law that just brutalizes people, or when there's a natural disaster and we lose a whole crop. I mean, we have to be prepared to have a kind of inner strength that I know is only available when we regard ourselves and one another as spiritual beings, working in partnership with all the spirits on the planet. How do we get through hard times? I mean, I'm yes to everything about getting us to focus on our strengths and to know our assets and to work well together. But I have seen too many communities and organizations where we just don't do well. We fall apart when the going gets very tough. And that's why I wrote the book Perseverance, to help us through those times when we feel angry or grief stricken or invisible or outraged or whatever, because this is part of our path going forward. It's part of the warrior's path. We need to learn how to be very strong in the hard times, and that takes community, and it takes focus, and it takes practice.
My goodness, Meg, you just triggered something in me using that word invisible, and I hadn't used it in that context. And I'm going to refer to your experiences in Detroit. And you make the statement, from growing our economy to growing our souls, reimagining taking place in Detroit. Could we sort of place that into a perspective of a community like Napranum, that is, rebuilding community livelihoods in a post-industrial world, perhaps, which is what's indicative about Detroit? How do you see Napranum, or that sort of community, growing now with its economy in sync with its deep spiritual groundwork?
Well, the phrase from growing our economy to growing our souls comes from the very good, smart activists in Detroit. I'm just quoting them. And their whole repositioning of how to develop community is by, in part, I mean, they do many things, and Detroit is not doing well because it's been taken over by the state, and basically they've done a lot to destroy people and destroy community, but it's still persevering. And they are spending a lot of time with youth now in helping them see that you could go get a job. You could go get a job at the car manufacturing plant, or you could go get a job in the government. But what you really want is work. So they're trying to convert the sensibility, especially in youth, from getting a job to finding your work. And your work is much more inclusive. It is satisfying to you, and it also contributes to the community. So I think that this is an important point for Napranum and other places that are pursuing jobs, possibly, where it's not enough to get women employed, it's to get women employed and young men employed in a feeling that the work that they're doing satisfies them and also contributes back to the community. And in that way, we protect ourselves from the ravages of paternalism and the ravages of corporate behavior, which will fire people when times get tough, or otherwise create a great deal of uncertainty and instability. So I think this focus on, can we find work within the community that the whole community benefits from and the individual benefits from, because it is truly work of their heart. It's very satisfying. Now, again, this is an upward struggle. It's easier to go get a job. But I appreciate this focus in Detroit because it is part of building a strong, resilient community in the face of great oppressive state power.
Annalise, your thoughts to that?
The program that we have co-created finds the balance between economic development and the spiritual well-being of the people. And what that actually means is that one of the initial stages of the program is about creating that community blueprint. And the community blueprint for Napranum, which is, the voice of hundreds of people who spoke up, was around community ownership, community engagement, fairness, and working together. So that is now the blueprint by which all future policies, programs and funding must be measured. So if we don't own it and haven't been engaged, and if we're not working together, then that policy, that program is not fit for us. And that's really the new conversation, the new narrative that exists in the community. But that's not enough. What also needs to happen is for children to start to have the conversation around who am I, what am I here for, and understanding employability and learnability skills from a really young age, so that by the time they are job ready, they are well prepared. They have that conversation in their hearts and minds, and they're ready and they can move forward. But that's not enough either. So we need to get the young adults involved around capability building, around them choosing career pathways of their own choices. And that part of whole of community change has been massively successful with, gosh, Maryanne, it must be 80-90% of the youth on that program are now all employed. Parents get involved in the conversation about what can we do and how can we contribute. So if we look at one of the more known initiatives in Napranum, and this was a first for community, was the first building joint venture where the people of Napranum design their own homes and have a financial stake in that joint venture, in that building enterprise. And as a result, there is no vandalism. People have a sense of pride and belonging because they truly do own those homes and that design, and there's a pride of place there. So in this small part of far north Queensland, in this community, we've put into practice some of those, I guess, age-old principles and standing together. And yes, women play a very prominent role in that, but it is about whole of community supporting one another.
Thanks, Annalise. Let me just ask you, Maryanne, and I may be a bit off track here, so forgive me if I am, but often we talk about the mining company down the road, and obviously that employs a lot of people. Meg makes the case here that rather than finding a job is to find work more inclusive, completely understandable. There's a fine line, isn't there, between sending the young kids out to the mining and on the other hand keeping them, if possible, within the community to grow and work within the community. How does that work in your mind, Maryanne?
Well, they have a choice in life whether they want to work in the mine or stay in the community. So they're doing that. If they want to go and work in the mining company, they'll go. But most of them want to work in the community and be part of the development in the community and the change. So they stay in the community. And most of them have love for horses too. So that's another step that we have to take, is to have an outstation with horses for our young men. Because our fathers and uncles, they were the best horsemen when they were young. They were proud to do drove, and things are much easier now with them taking cattle from one country to another with trucks. But in those days, they worked very hard and did droving, took cattle from one country to another. And that's what I see. The young people, they want to be horsemen too. It's not easy, working with horses too, but they love horses. So in that way, they'll stay within the community to have an outstation and work with horses.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Meg, but was that a sort of a type of direction you were taking there when you were talking about work more than just jobs, because with Napranum they have a very large mining company, and obviously that entices the young folk to work there. And it's a fine line, isn't it? Because it takes it away from the community, but it also gives them a future and money in their pockets.
Well, what I'm hearing in these very brief descriptions of Napranum is it's been done in a way that's paying attention to the needs of the youth, to the needs of the women, to the economy, to building physical buildings. And all of that sounds perfect to me. I mean, that's how it should go. And then you get to the point that Maryanne just described, where you do have individual choice as a young man, but you want them to know enough to make a wise choice. And it sounds to me like Napranum has created the conditions for children to be enticed to stay in the community because it's a good place to live. I mean, in the past, so many youth still happens, they flee their own communities in the hope of a better job somewhere. And as you just mentioned, money in their pocket and the good life. And then they find that it's quite depressing, it's very lonely, and they get into very bad behaviors. It's that connection with the community formed at a young age that I think saves our children from being seduced by the lure of money, fast money and a good job. So it really, I've just been smiling here at the descriptions from Napranum, because I do know what it feels like when you're in a strong community, a healthy community. You do want to stay there. It's very satisfying to our youth, and to others. And so it creates a level of attraction that's very important. And then, of course, to notice what would further attract them, like horses and working with cattle and drovers and such. I think that's really important also. But obviously, there's already here a community that is attractive enough that the youth want to stay. And I think that's wonderful.
That actually paints a lovely picture, that attraction that you talk to in terms of the agriculture, and that really is a lovely perspective. I'm going to go back now to the Women's Healing Program, and in the last part of our 20-25 minutes get into some focus on this. Start with yourself, Annalise, the Women's Healing Program. Could you talk to your perspectives of that program and how women responded to healing and leading? There's a big difference between those two. Could you just describe that and how that occurred in your mind?
Well, first and foremost, I asked the women what they wanted, and for me, the message is really simple here. The answer lies in the wisdom of the people, and I see my role as an instrument. I see my role as asking great questions and helping to create pathways that they actually want. As Maryanne said, it's all about choice. And so it started with conversation and with very deep dialogue about what they would want to see as part of this program. And so the program then created a very strong balance between who we are as leaders, being able to create for ourselves a true voice in the community, and also to look at some of those deeper concerns that have caused pain in the past, and to look at how do we really how do we create that presence of tolerance, how do we create that presence to let go, how do we create that presence to face what's in front of us, to be true warriors and to be able to step through that. But again, it all comes back to, well, who am I in all of this, and to put the magnifying glass on that, and to know that you have that internal resource that you can take the next step and the next step and move forward. So they created the balance between leadership and healing for themselves, and between them they created a true sisterhood, because it was a balance of elders who came along, young women, young mums, We had a really diverse age group and diverse conversations and experiences, but we were all one. There was no separation, there was no difference, there was an absolute respect for the elders in that space. That is always very, very front of mind and prominent. But it wasn't like a hierarchy, it was a spiritual place of respect, and we sang around the campfire, which got really smoky in that shed. We went abseiling off the side of mountains, which was all about facing our fears, mine in particular. And all of that with an intent to serve our community and to be true to our own selves. And it just worked, it just connected, and that bond has stayed with us.
Before I take this to Maryanne, let me just ask you, this is all about spiritual circle to me over hierarchy that Annalise talks to, but healing, leading, Annalise talks to becoming a true voice in the community. Your thoughts to this, Maryanne?
It heals the inside of a person, not just the outside and pretend that all is good. It's about seeing the change in a person. What has become over this person? But it's the same question the person, this certain person find is, who am I? The person have found the answer to their true identity of who they are. And that is a great healing, and that's why we're passing it on to our children. That, sometimes you are lost, but you are not alone. You have others around you that can lift you up and support you. And the main thing is to find the answer to who I am.
Thank you, Maryanne. Meg, immediately come to you then. Reimagining process of Indigenous evolution, and particularly, Meg, staying with this healing, if we may, further feminine strengths for community and relationship building. What is it that is essential to understand about that healing process in this context?
Well, I go back to what is well known in the past among Indigenous people, which is we cannot make it on our own. The original word for health comes from the word for wholeness, and that comes from an older word meaning for holiness. And I've always felt that that's really the path, that as we come together in healthy relationships and with healthy direction and with a healthy intent, we create real healing. And in biology, the principle is that whenever a system is in trouble, you create healing by strengthening connections. So, yes, it's the connection with self, but it's self within community. And I think that's our path going forward for all of us. Healing is related to wholeness, which is related to holiness.
Maryanne, how does the healing process for you talk to the importance of remembering our ancestors, our wisdoms, our traditions? Because healing is a lot about that, is it not? It's not just healing us, but it's healing our friends, our family, our ancestors, our lands.
The people coming together when there's a funeral or there's celebration, that is healing, because a community comes together and celebrates and also share the sorrow with the family that have lost their loved ones. In that way, people heal each other because they are together and they feel the warmth. When people get together, there's this warmness within people. And that is the main thing with us when we want healing. We sit around the fire. We have a certain plant that we can throw in the fire. And with the smoke, it heals the people around it. And when we talk about warmth, even if there's no fire around, but when you are talking to people, you will straight away feel the warmth that when you are with people or with the crowd of people.
Well, Annalise, I'm going to ask for your thoughts to that. This wisdom in community, you've experienced it there, Annalise. I haven't. I wish I could. This is a real strength. Your thoughts?
I'm reminded of the power of forgiveness as being our most important contribution that we can make to the healing of our communities, to the healing of our nation, to the healing of our planet. And it was only yesterday I ran a 3-day workshop for traditional owners right across the Western Cape communities, and a number of stakeholders across those areas came together, and it was all about creating a strategy for future generations. And Maryanne closed the workshop, and we had our metaphoric fire in the centre of the room with candles burning and lots of pebbles and rocks, and we created it really beautifully. And Maryanne gathered us all in a circle, and we put our hand over the fire, and the energy between us and within that circle was very, very powerful. And it was only a few weeks ago that Maryanne took me out on country to boat chat, and to me that was just a sacred day. And again, we had the fire burning there, and we cooked some food, and we didn't actually bring any food, but we ate all day from what was there on the land, and the healing that created. And so to be connected to Mother Country, to be connected to the Creator Spirit, to be out there on country, to be able to come together in a circle and just share and bond, suddenly there is no hierarchy, there is no separation, there's no them and us. There only exists a pure spirit of connectedness, and I have felt it, I've experienced it, I've lived it, not just once, not just twice, but many times in my experience with Maryanne and with this community. I've learnt a lot.
To conclude this, Meg, we're talking about faith, grace, we're talking about balance here, I believe. And I have to say it because I've talked to this and had a series in the past, the most successful series actually, called The Secrets of the Divine Feminine. Could we talk about that here in this context? It's very powerful, isn't it? The wisdom that comes out of that, the connection, everything that Annalise has talked about that she experienced on that wonderful ride out into the country.
Well, I don't know if I want to speak about this as the divine feminine. I want to speak about this in my very recent experience of just being in Christchurch with a lot of the community and listening to their stories of overcoming the earthquakes, especially the second one, which was very traumatic and very destructive, and people died. And people still, 2.5 years later, still needing to talk about their experience. But this is also an experience of oneness, of joy, when we are working together on behalf of one another, as is always common in a disaster situation, in a natural disaster. People always describe their experiences, even though they were dealing with terror and death and loss, they describe their experiences of working together as joyful. I've heard this for many, many years, and I heard it again in Christchurch just a few days ago. And this is the real power of community. We discover what it means to feel fully alive, fully connected, fully present for one another. And it's the loss of ego, it's the loss of individual neediness, and those experiences are joyful no matter what is going on around us. And I think that's, for me, the great lesson that I take, that there are many ways we can access this experience. We can be sitting around a sacred fire. We can be in a wonderful spiritual practice together, or we can be working really desperately hard to save other people after a disaster. And the feeling is one of real community. It's not quite the right word, but of oneness, of being very present. And Those qualities are the best moments of being human for me.
Let me just ask you, Annalise, for your thoughts in response to that.
I feel quite complete, actually. I feel very peaceful. And I feel that we've covered so many wonderful topics about love and the creator spirit, and wisdom of the collective and the spirit of connectedness. I know this to be real, and I know it to be true because I've experienced it, and so I can stand with absolute conviction and say that the work is real. My message to everybody, anybody who is listening, is to never, ever, ever give up and to absolutely persevere, because it is real and we can find that strength in one another.
Maryanne, as ever, we always have a news item. I'd like you to maybe paint a picture for our listeners of the rainy seasons there that are coming up. How does that affect the country that you live in? Can you paint that picture so that we can know what it feels like?
Well, at the moment, waiting for the rain, and we keep telling each other it's a bit late. Sometimes the rain comes in October, November, but it didn't start yet. We know when the rain comes, it gets so humid. Sometimes we listen to the birds calling out, and a lot of things around us tells us before we look at the weather in the news, in the TV. We know that bird calling out, the certain flowers blooming, and we know straight away that it's telling us about rain. The rain will come soon. So normally when the rain starts to pour, it's always very heavy and wet, and as always when rain comes around and the rivers get full and the swamps, the place looks green again. Right now it's brown because there's not enough rain. We have cyclonic season, a lot of wind and rain.
And next time in our December edition, of course, we'll be talking about Christmas traditions. And with that, let me go to final thoughts for the day. Meg, can I start with yourself? It's been wonderful to have your participation here. Your final thoughts to our discussion today.
Well, I've certainly loved learning about the great and continuing work that's going on in Napranum, and so well-founded. And I think, we have covered a lot of different areas, but all of them seem to come together for me in understanding that the work is really to, one, believe in our capacity and one another's capacity, and to honor the fact that our gifts and our capacities are best expressed in community, because then so many people benefit. And once we have a healthy community as a foundation for ourselves and for others, then so much more becomes possible. So that's really the path that I think we're all on.
Meg, thank you so very much. Annalise Jennings, your final thoughts for the day.
I'm reminded of Napranum's vision statement that we created through this process, and I believe it really does say it all. So I'd like to read it to you. Our legacy is the creation of a sustainable community based on choice, trust, and respect. And I believe that really does encapsulate our message here today. Thank you.
And Maryanne Coconut. Maryanne, your final thoughts for our dialogue today.
I've enjoyed being here, talking with you and Mag. I love telling stories and have people know about my culture and my lifestyle and our people's lifestyle in the community. And we believe if we want a healthy, fruitful community, that we work together as one. We hold each other's hands and get stronger and build a foundation. And it's always my saying that when we plant a seed, we always like to see that tree grow up to be a healthy tree, to bear good fruits.
Maryanne, thank you for that. And I will thank you all individually as we complete the programme today. Annalise, Jennings, thank you so very much.
Thank you, David. And lovely to meet you, Meg.
Yes.
And Maryanne Coconut, Maryanne, thank you to you.
Thank you, David. Till next time we talk again.
Absolutely. And Meg Wheatley, Meg, it's been a real honour. Thank you so much for participating today.
Well, I'm leaving with a great sense of confidence that this work will continue and this work bears fruit.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners today, that has been episode 5 in the long-term series Whole of Community Change from Napranum, Queensland, Australia. Do hope that you have enjoyed this program as much as we. You can gain information on this and any other program in the series at the official website davidgibbons.org, or for international panels crossingoverthebridge.com. Meanwhile, wherever you are in this world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.